I read those instructions, I read that order of construction, and I was like, no, I am just not doing that. Hello everybody, June here. Today I am coming to you with a video review for the Vali dress from Pattern Fantastique. It is the dress I am wearing, and this is a pattern company that is kind of new to me. I had heard about it, but I hadn't actually looked into a lot of their stuff. And about, I don't know, maybe a month ago or so, I saw a picture of a Vali dress somebody had made, and I was immediately in love. I mean, if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I love a big sleeve. I love a flowy dress, and the less constricting for my everyday clothing, the better. And this pattern sort of encapsulates really all of that. This video is going to have 3 parts. The first part, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own dress and how I made it. The second part is going to be a couple of things to consider if you want to make this dress. And then the third part is going to be the actual pattern review. So what I think about the pattern and so on. If you want to jump around to some of those sections, I will have a timestamp in the description. Let's start with my dress. I made the dress in a size 18, and I was following the pattern company's instructions for sizing for this particular dress. It is a very loose dress from here down, so the yoke sort of ends here and then is just one piece of the skirt. And so the part that really has to fit is the yoke front and back. And the pattern has instructions on how to choose the best size for you so that, you know, the yoke fits as it should. And following those instructions, I chose a size 18, which is one size down from what I would have had to choose if I was choosing based on my full bust alone. And I think that was a good choice. It is very billowy, and it's not like it's not constricting in any way because I went a size down. I think that the sizing choice in my particular case was a good one. I didn't really do any fit changes other than shorten the body, which in this case is also the skirt because I'm short. Again, I say this pretty much in every single video I ever make, and I needed to shorten it. I shortened it 2 inches, about 12 inches up from the side seam hem section, both in the front and of course in the back. And that was really all that I did in terms of fit. In terms of construction, I did 2 things a little bit differently. I finished my hem with bias tape because this fabric was just not happy to be sewn with a narrow hem foot or even folded twice like the pattern has you do. The pattern has you, or the pattern asks you to do a row of stitching about maybe like 1/8 of an inch from the raw edge of the hem, fold up and then do it again and then stitch your hem. My fabric was just not having any of that. So after a few attempts to do other kinds of hem finishes, I just went ahead and used the bias tape because there was just no other way for me to do it. And I also didn't do the pockets. This is a very loose dress, very flowy, in very thin fabric. And I will link to the video that I have about this and why not all dresses should have pockets. And every time that I do a video about a dress like this, I probably will link to that because I explain it all there. Not about this particular dress, but in general about dresses that shouldn't have pockets. This is a dress that I don't think should have pockets. The pockets are not anchored in any way. The pockets are just in the side seam. It's a flimsy fabric. It's very thin. Your things are going to show through. The pockets are not going to be stable. So in reality, a pocket in a dress like this is going to be a liability more than it's going to be helpful. The fabric for this dress is a cotton silk blend voile that I bought at Mood Fabrics, a brick and mortar store, about, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago or so. And I have been saving it for something special. And the moment that I saw the Vali dress, like, this is the fabric that I had in mind because I knew that it would be a good combination of pattern and fabric. The dress is relatively simple aside from the, you know, the big poofy sleeves, and the fabric is quite loud. It is a black, as you can see, background, and then it has like strawberry patch print, like really small print. So I think it's a good combination. Now let's talk about a couple of things to consider if you're going to make this dress. First, if you're going to make this dress from a print like I have rather than from a solid, you have to think about the placement of the sleeves on your print versus the grain line of the sleeve pattern. The sleeve pattern has the grain line going on the straight grain rather than on the cross grain, because it's not just the sleeve, it is also the size of your body. So the sleeve starts about here, so it forms the size of your body. It also forms the sleeve and also a little bit of the, it's not quite the waist seam, but what would be the waist seam. And so for that reason, they have the grain line going up and down. However, if you cut your sleeve that way and you have a print that is directional, you are going to end up with the print on your sleeve, instead of going up and down, it will go crossways. And I didn't particularly want that, so I cut my sleeve across the grain as I normally would cut a sleeve, which means that the pattern on my sleeve actually goes up and down like the pattern on the rest of the dress. This obviously won't affect you if you are working with a solid or you're working with a non-directional print, but for a directional print is something to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is these little devils here. I don't think anyone loves turning tubes, but the way that the pattern instructs you to do it is impossible. I don't know how they did it. So they have you sew these tubes with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which leaves you with a 1/4 inch of a tube to turn. And it was just impossible. I tried and I could not do it. And this is a very thin fabric. So if your fabric is any thicker than mine, it's going to be even worse. So I would urge you to either not do the stitch and turn. So instead of stitch and turn, you can do fold in and then again, as if you were folding in bias tape, for example. Or do what I did, and rather than use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you use an 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then it gives you enough room to turn the tube. Otherwise, it's impossible. Even better, if you hate turning tubes as much as I do, you may want to consider just buying some braid that matches your fabric. And I tried doing that. I went to the garment district and I bought some trim that I thought would match my fabric, but it turned out to not be a good match, and so I did the tubes and I hated every moment of it. So something to keep in mind. And now this is the third part of the video. Let's talk about the pattern itself. This is my review of the pattern. And I want to start by saying that the actual pattern pieces do go well together. The drafting is not a problem. All of my issues with this particular pattern have to do with the instructions. The instructions are unnecessarily complicated and vague, both at the same time. One example, when you are sewing the skirt, so the lower part of the dress, to the yoke and the sleeves, the instructions say that in order for everything to lay nicely, you may have to clip into your seam allowance. But it doesn't tell you which seam allowance you have to clip into, which leaves you wondering, which seam allowance is it? So you're sewing a straight line to an L, and so of course you may have to clip the seam allowance, but it would have been nice for them to say which seam allowance. I also found that the instructions have words that are missing, and it's not a huge deal, like your brain will fill it in. It's not essential to the construction, but it's little things that make you think that maybe this wasn't as looked over before it was released to the world as you would hope a pattern this expensive would be. There are many illustrations, but they're not always clear in ways that they need to be. For example, when you are putting the facing together, there are two pieces of the facing for the front, one that goes for the circular part and then the one for this slit here. And the pieces for this slit actually are shaped at the top and the bottom. And so they're not interchangeable, and they're also left and right. But by looking at the diagram, you wouldn't know which way they go. And again, this is something that you can figure out by trial and error, but it would have been better if in the diagram itself, you could see which way these pieces went. And I have been sewing for a very long time, and I actually had to think about that part really hard. And I even had to pick the seam and do it again, because the first time I did it wrong. And again, for a pattern that is as expensive, that is kind of not acceptable. And my last big issue with the instructions on this pattern is that the construction order is so chaotic, it's so erratic, and it just doesn't make sense. Rather than have you start with components like do the yoke and complete the yoke, then do the sleeves or the body or whatever, they have you start in one place, leave that piece unfinished, and then move on to something else, then go back and do a little bit more work on that other piece. And it's just so much chaos. It's confusing, and it is ripe for you to somehow miss a step. For example, the first things they have you do is stay stitch, which is great. They have you stay stitch the neckline on the yoke front and back, but then they also have you stay stitch parts of the body of the dress, so the skirt part, and then just put it away. And then they come back and they have you run some gathering stitches and then put it away, and do a pre-ironed hem on your sleeves and put it away, and then come back and do the gathering stitches on the other side of the sleeve and put it away. And it's just so chaotic, and it's unnecessarily so. So my order of operations for this dress was I completed the facing, I sewed the front and back yoke to itself, I attached the face into the yoke. I then moved on to, I think the body was the next part. So when I moved on to the body, that's when I stitched the body. That's when I did the running gathering stitches on the body. And then I'll move to the sleeves, and then that's when I did the gathering of the sleeves. That's when I did the hem of the sleeves, and basically have all the components as finished as possible before putting them together. Because this whole idea of doing part of one thing, putting it away, doing part of the thing again and put it away, and then it's just so much chaos, and it's unnecessary. The stay stitching is absolutely necessary. You have to stay stitch. But if you're not working actively with a pattern piece, there is no reason why you need to stay stitch it at the beginning. You can just put it away until you need it, and then it's just a more sort of logical order. I haven't used any other patterns by this company, so I don't know if this is something that they regularly do, but I read those instructions, I read that order of construction, and I was like, no, I am just not doing that. And in case you're wondering, there is actually a name for the system in which you have as much of the components finished before you start putting them together to other components. And you usually start, like if you're making a dress, you start with the bodice, and you do as much of the bodice as you can before you start sewing the sleeves. Then you do as much construction of the sleeve as you can before you put it on the bodice. And then the same with the skirt and so on. There's a name for that. It's called the Bishop method, and it's from the 1960s. I don't think that we call it that anymore. I don't think it's something that we actively name anything, but that is usually how garments are constructed, because it just makes sense. And there were a couple other things here and there, but those are the biggest issues that I found with this pattern, and those are the ones that I wanted to talk about. So all in all, I really like the dress. It's giving, cottagecore meets nap dress meets Cuban grandmother / abuela, and honestly, I love it. I'm into it. I've never met a puff sleeve I didn't like, and I am still very, very much into my flowy dress era that I've been in for years, because hard pants are a no, and I'm really happy with this dress. I haven't been sewing as much as I would have liked, and so I'm happy that I made something that I actually enjoyed making, and I enjoy the look of it, even though it makes me look a little bit like a toddler sometimes. And yeah, it was a little bit of a challenge at times to make it, especially trying to get the corners of the yoke here to look nice and neat. But overall, I'm happy that I spent the time, and I'm happy that I used my sim reaper quite a bit and didn't settle for good enough, because I really like the dress, and the fabric is kind of pricey and it's kind of precious because I don't think I can get it anymore. But I am very happy with this dress, and that is all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.